If you think you're logical, you're not. Have you ever heard someone say, that's not logical, or describe another person as being illogical, or describe what they were saying as the logical course of action? Most often I hear this used somewhat chauvinistically as men describing women as illogical, or saying, oh well, she's the logical one, or describing a relationship in this manner. I have a contentious idea here. If you think you're logical, you're not. Ever. Like, ever. Ever. And here's why. When you say that something is logical, what do you mean? Logic itself doesn't say what is right and wrong. It only says what structures work and what structures don't. For example, you can say, if I have 2 left feet, then the moon is made of cheese. I have 2 left feet, then the moon is made of cheese. This is absolutely flawless logic. If you accept the first 2 statements as true, these are called the premises, then the conclusion necessarily follows. It's like 2 plus 2 is 4. Let's run that by again. If I have 2 left feet, then the moon is made of cheese. This is a ridiculous statement. It's false. But buy in for a second. Let's say that that statement is true. If this, then this. Now I tell you I have 2 left feet. I've now told you that I have 2 left feet, and I've also told you what happens if I have 2 left feet. The moon must be made of cheese. Therefore, the moon must be made of cheese. Totally ridiculous, but because you have accepted these 2 premises, logic is all about if these things are true, do they by themselves, based on their structure, make this have to happen. This is called a valid argument. The second layer in discussing how good an argument is to say whether or not it is sound. Soundness comes entirely from how true these statements are. Valid means that the structure is good. If these are true, this has to follow. Sound means these are actually true. So this follows and it's true. So when someone says that they're logical, there's a couple ways to look at it. Oftentimes they'll use it to mean, use logical as a synonym for smart or reasonable, and it doesn't actually work that way. They'll say, oh, that's the reasonable thing to do, or that's a smart thing to do. Spock uses it in this way. Spock does not know 2 cents about logic. It's kind of ridiculous. Kirk actually outlogics him several times in the series. He talks a couple computers to death using paradoxes. Let's say you have this friend. The friend says that they're logical. If you boil it down, oftentimes they will say, well, certain things are logical. What that means is that they have accepted a premise, one of these layers at the first part of the argument, without question. And that's interesting. Oftentimes you hear logic being used as a synonym for based on every level, no assumptions anywhere. You'll say that, oh, that's scientific. It's built in stone. There's no assumptions in it. There's no faith built into it. But if someone has accepted a premise without questioning it at any layer, then they have an unquestioned premise defining the outcomes of what they think is logical. Logical is often held as an opposite to unreasonable or unquestioned or not thought through. So this idea that you have a premise that you haven't examined is a problem because it means that you yourself have not thought the argument through. So let's say Spock comes in to the scene. You have Spock here and you have Kirk here, and Kirk says, we have to do this thing, and Spock immediately jumps in and says, that's not logical, Captain. What is he saying? At that moment, a course of action cannot be logical or illogical unless you have pre-assumed certain things. These assumptions, if they are unspoken, are called enthymons. An enthymon is an unspoken layer or line, a premise in an argument that is required in order to make it valid. So Spock says that this course of action is illogical. At that point, you have to identify what these assumptions are. It could be an assumption about what the stated purpose is. He could be saying, we have a goal that is this, and your plan of action won't achieve it, or that we're going to die if you do that thing. Rather than saying, let's not do that thing because we're going to die, he says it's illogical because he has assumed as a premise at some layer that we don't want to die. There are certain conditions that he is imposing on Kirk that he's not stating outright. So he's basically saying, if you assume the same things that I am assuming, then the thing that you are suggesting is not logical. This is what every time someone says that's not logical and does not explicitly show on every layer why, they're saying, if you don't assume the same things I'm assuming, then that's not logical. And typically, one of the other enthymons that they're throwing in there is, then you're not smart if you don't share the same assumptions that I do. which is patently ridiculous in most cases. Then again, they might know things you don't, so listen, but with a grain of salt. If you think you're logical, what you're saying is, I'm assuming certain things and I expect all other people to assume the same things. Be explicit about them. Pay attention to yourself. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. So if you want to take your logic to the next level, go a step deeper and figure out what your assumptions are. What are these statements of value that you hold so dear that you're not even willing to think about them, so that you're able to explicitly define why you're coming to different conclusions than your significant other or than the Kirk in your life. Comment below with the time that someone has called you illogical and put in a guess for what you think their unstated premise was, what that assumption was that was required to make your statement illogical. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, be sure to hit the like button or the dislike button if you think you are logical to the bitter end. Good luck.